This story is titled, "My Parents Didn't Invite Me to Our Annual Family Dinner. And when I showed up uninvited, they slammed the door in my face, so I went home in tears. But when they came begging for help months later, I refused them." Sup Reddit, my name is Marcus, and I'm 27 years old. I work in digital marketing, nothing particularly fancy, but it pays the bills and keeps me comfortable. I live in a small apartment just outside Miami, and I've been on my own since I was 20 years old. Once I moved out of my parents' house, I never really looked back or had any regrets about my decision to be independent. I've always been the type of guy who handles his responsibilities quietly and efficiently. I don't ask for handouts from anyone, and I've never needed anyone to come rescue me from my problems. I take care of myself and my obligations without making a big deal about it or expecting praise for doing what any adult should do. Meanwhile, my younger sister Katie, who's 24, has been living like absolute royalty at our parents' house this entire time. She doesn't work what anyone would consider a real job, instead claiming that she's an artist. The closest she's ever come to actually selling any of her artwork was when our mom bought one of her abstract pieces and hung it up in the dining room like it belonged in some prestigious museum. Yeah, okay, that's totally the same thing as having a legitimate art career. So anyway, Christmas rolled around this past year, and I decided to do something special for the family. I spent time making a homemade pumpkin pie because my mom had always told me it was her absolute favorite dessert. I carefully prepared it, making sure it turned out perfectly, and then drove the 40 minutes across Miami to my parents' house with the warm pie in hand. I figured it would be the usual group gathering. Me, my parents, Katie, maybe a couple of our cousins if they were in town, or possibly my aunt if she wasn't traveling somewhere for the holidays. Nothing too crazy or overwhelming. Just the typical family Christmas dinner that we'd had for years. I pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed there were significantly more cars parked there than usual. There was clearly a full house situation going on, with way more people than I had expected. I figured maybe they had decided to invite some extra folks this year or had made some last-minute additions to the guest list. Despite the surprise, I was actually in a genuinely good mood. The pie smelled absolutely amazing, and I was honestly kind of excited to be there and spend time with everyone. Looking back now, that excitement feels pretty foolish, but at the time I was just happy to be part of the family celebration. I walked up to the front porch with the pie carefully balanced in my hands and knocked on the door. After waiting a few seconds without any response, I knocked again, a little louder this time. All the lights were clearly on inside the house and I could hear music playing along with the sound of laughter and conversation. Everything seemed perfectly normal and festive, exactly what you'd expect from a family Christmas gathering. Then the door finally opened, and my dad was standing there looking at me. Now, my dad isn't exactly the warmest or most emotionally expressive guy on even his best days, but the look he gave me in that moment was something else entirely. It was pure confusion, like he genuinely had no clue whatsoever what I was doing standing on his porch. Before I could even get a word out or explain why I was there, he looked directly at me and said, "What are you doing here?" At first, I honestly thought he was just joking around with me. So I kind of smiled and held up the homemade pie I'd brought, gesturing toward it as I said, Christmas dinner?" I expected him to laugh or crack a smile, maybe make some joke about how I was running late or something. But he didn't laugh at all. He just stood there looking increasingly uncomfortable and awkward. Then he did this thing where he rubbed the back of his neck, something he always does when he's nervous or doesn't know what to say. After that uncomfortable pause, he said, "I thought we told you it would just be a small gathering this year." I blinked at him, completely confused by what he was implying. What did he mean by that? I asked him to clarify what he was talking about. He mumbled something under his breath that I couldn't quite make out, but it sounded like, "Thought this was handled," or something along those lines. Then he told me he'd go get my mom to talk to me. He didn't even invite me inside the house or suggest that I come in out of the cold. He just turned around and walked away, leaving me standing there alone on the porch like some unwanted door-to-door salesman. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, feeling increasingly awkward as I stood there. The foil covering the pie tray was crinkling in my hands as I tried to maintain my grip on it. The pie was still warm from the oven, but I could feel it cooling rapidly in the December air. I found myself staring at the front door, hoping that maybe someone else would come and open it instead. Maybe they'd say something like, "Sorry, that was just a misunderstanding, come on in and join us." Instead, my mom came to the door after what felt like an eternity. She opened it just wide enough for her body to completely block any view of the inside of the house, though I could still hear the distinct sounds of silverware clinking against plates and someone laughing in the background. She gave me this tight, polite smile, The exact kind of forced expression you give when someone knocks on your door and you already know you're not buying whatever they're trying to sell you. I didn't even get a simple hi or happy Christmas greeting from her. She just looked at me and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Marcus, but we don't have any more seats available. Maybe next year." I stood there completely stunned, blinking at her as I tried to process what she had just said to me. I thought maybe I had somehow misheard her or misunderstood what she meant, so I asked her, "What?" She repeated herself, but slower this time, almost like she thought I was mentally slow or having trouble understanding basic English. "We don't have more seats," she said again with that same fake patient tone. I managed to look past her shoulder and into the house, trying to see what was really going on inside. "You didn't think I was coming?" I asked, still trying to make sense of this bizarre situation. She responded as if it made perfect sense, saying, "We assumed you had plans. You usually keep to yourself." I was completely baffled by this response and asked her what she was talking about. I reminded her that I had texted her that very morning about coming to dinner. She blinked at me like that message had somehow been completely erased from her brain or like it had never existed in the first place. "Right, well, I didn't think you'd actually show up," she said, as if this was a reasonable assumption to make. I looked past her again, trying to get a better view into the house where people were sitting around the dining table, laughing and clearly enjoying themselves. Their plates were already full of food, and the dinner was obviously well underway. There were definitely enough seats available for more people. I could see that with my own eyes. Hell, I even spotted a young kid sitting on a booster seat at the end of the table, but somehow there wasn't room for me. Here I was, the same son who had been covering half of their monthly bills for the past 2 years, being told that I wasn't invited to Christmas dinner. I couldn't speak for several long moments. I honestly didn't even know what to say in response to this situation. My mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. I felt like I was in some kind of surreal nightmare. Finally, I just gave a small nod. More to myself than to them, really. I turned around and walked back to my car without saying another word. I didn't drop the pie dramatically or slam any doors in anger. I just calmly got into my vehicle, carefully set the pie dish on the passenger seat, and sat there for several minutes like my brain needed time to completely reboot and process what had just happened. During the entire drive home, I kept thinking that maybe I had misunderstood something important. Maybe there had been some kind of miscommunication that I wasn't aware of. Maybe this whole situation wasn't as messed up as it felt in the moment. But deep down, I knew that was just wishful thinking on my part. It was exactly what it looked like. They had organized a full Christmas dinner, invited everyone except me, and when I showed up unexpectedly, they acted like I was some random guy who had gotten the wrong address. When I got home, I reheated the pie in my oven and ate it alone on my couch. Let me tell you, it didn't taste like victory or satisfaction. It tasted like being completely replaced and forgotten by the people who were supposed to care about me most. The next morning was incredibly weird. Not sad weird exactly, just completely off and strange. I woke up much later than I usually do, and didn't really feel motivated to do anything productive. I checked my phone and discovered that I had absolutely no missed calls and no text messages waiting for me. Not a single, "Hey, sorry about yesterday" message, or even one of those fake, "Hope you're doing okay" texts that people send when they feel obligated to check in. There was total silence from my family, which somehow made the whole situation feel even worse. It was like I wasn't even worth the effort of pretending to care about. I hadn't planned on talking to anyone that day about what had happened, but my cousin Jessica ended up surprising me by showing up at my apartment. She knocked around noon carrying a bag full of leftovers from the Christmas dinner, and she had this particular look on her face like she already knew exactly what had transpired the night before. Jessica is the kind of cousin who absolutely doesn't sugarcoat anything. She's the type of person who will call out a waiter for bringing her the wrong side dish and won't even blink while doing it. So when she sat down on my couch and asked me directly, "What the hell did they pull on you?" I knew immediately that she had heard something about the situation. I told her everything that had happened, and I didn't even need to exaggerate any of the details. I just laid out the entire story exactly as it occurred. From driving over with the homemade pie to being told there weren't enough seats available. Jessica shook her head continuously throughout my entire recounting of events, repeatedly muttering "unreal" under her breath, like she was trying her hardest not to completely explode with anger. Then she said something that really stuck with me and hit harder than I expected. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "They knew exactly what they were doing, Marcus. That wasn't some kind of accident or misunderstanding. That was a deliberate choice they made." Hearing it from her perspective made it hit me much harder than when I was just processing it alone, because deep down I already knew that what she was saying was absolutely true. I had been wanting to believe that it was some kind of mix-up or miscommunication, like maybe they had assumed I was going out of town for the holidays or had other plans. But the reality was that they had straight up decided they didn't want me there, and they didn't even have the basic decency to tell me in advance. They just let me drive all the way over there, knock on their door, and stand there like a complete idiot holding a homemade pie. Jessica also filled me in on some additional information that made the situation even worse. She told me that Katie had been going around saying things to other family members like, "Marcus is always so distant from everyone, and he probably wouldn't even show up anyway." This was particularly wild to hear, considering that I was actually the family member who used to set reminders in my phone to RSVP to family events on time. I was the one who brought side dishes to gatherings without even being asked to contribute anything. I texted everyone on their birthdays like clockwork, never missing a single one. Meanwhile, Katie can't even be bothered to reply to a simple group message unless it's specifically about her or includes a bunch of emojis that catch her attention. Everything about Katie has always been treated by my parents like she's made of the most delicate glass imaginable. When she failed 2 different college classes in the same semester, my mom's response was that the professors didn't properly nurture her creative spirit. When she rear-ended someone in a parking lot last year, my dad immediately blamed the sun glare rather than her driving. She consistently gets babied and coddled for stuff that I would have been grounded for weeks over when I was her age. Meanwhile, I'm the family member who has been financially keeping things running smoothly for quite a while now. I've been helping my parents with their utility bills on a regular basis, sending money through Venmo whenever they needed groceries, and I even co-signed on a small loan so they could consolidate some of their debt and get their finances back on track. I never once made a big deal about any of this financial assistance or acted like they owed me something in return. I just figured that's what family members do for each other when someone needs help, right? Now I'm starting to see the situation much more clearly than I ever have before. I wasn't actually considered family in their eyes. I was simply a source of financial support. I was the reliable guy they called whenever the car broke down or when the refrigerator stopped working properly. Katie was treated like the heart and soul of the household, the precious daughter they adored, while I was essentially the safety net they never bothered to thank or acknowledge. Jessica even told me that during the Christmas dinner, she had overheard my mom saying to someone, "We wanted to keep things peaceful this year." Peaceful, like my mere presence would have somehow ruined the entire dinner experience for everyone. Like I'm some kind of chaos-bringing troublemaker who disrupts family gatherings. I don't yell at people, I don't start arguments or create drama. The worst thing I ever do is ask reasonable questions when something doesn't make logical sense to me. But sure, let's blame me for being the problem. That day, I just kind of sat in complete silence in my apartment. It wasn't even a dramatic, emotional silence, just a quiet, contemplative state where I didn't feel like doing anything. I didn't listen to music, didn't turn on the TV or scroll through my phone. I just sat there looking at the cold leftover pie sitting in my refrigerator that no one had eaten except me. It's funny how quickly things start making perfect sense when you finally stop trying to give people the benefit of the doubt all the time. I started thinking back to all the little moments and incidents that I had previously brushed off or rationalized away. Like last Christmas, when I had actually paid for most of the dinner expenses without even thinking twice about it. I didn't hesitate to spend the money because I wanted everyone to have a nice holiday. I ordered a big, expensive smoked ham as the main course, bought all the side dishes from a nice catering place, and even brought extra Tupperware containers so my mom wouldn't have to worry about washing as many dishes afterward. Then when it came time for the traditional family photo, they told me to be the one taking the picture rather than being in it. They wanted me to take the photo, not be included in it as a family member. Katie got the center spot in that photo, with everyone else gathered around her like she was the absolute star of the entire show. I laughed it off at the time, thinking it was just a random coincidence or that someone needed to operate the camera. But looking at that moment now with fresh perspective, yeah, that was definitely a significant moment that I should have paid more attention to. There was also that time when my dad needed a new water heater for the house, and I covered a substantial part of the cost without being asked. He promised me, "We'll pay you back as soon as we can manage it," but that repayment never actually happened. It didn't bother me too much at the time because I figured they were still struggling financially and would get to it when they could. That was until I found out that they had bought Katie a brand new iPad just 1 month later, supposedly to help her with her digital art projects. She posted a selfie with it on social media like it was some amazing prize she had won from the heavens above. My name wasn't mentioned once in connection with the financial help I had provided for their emergency expense. I don't think my parents and Katie actually hate me or have any real animosity toward me personally. That's not what this situation is really about. I think the truth is that they simply don't think about me at all unless there's a specific reason to do so. I'm essentially background noise in their lives, useful when they need something, but completely optional when it comes to actual family moments and togetherness. Katie is clearly the star of the family, the golden child who gets all the attention and praise, while I'm just the reliable guy who shows up with homemade pie and gets told to come back next year when it's more convenient. After that realization hit me, I made a conscious decision not to reach out to any of them. I didn't send any text messages, didn't make any phone calls, and didn't try to initiate contact in any way. I figured that if they had something important to say to me or wanted to address what had happened, they would be the ones to say it. But I wasn't going to chase after them or beg for their attention this time. Not after everything that had occurred. And honestly, that complete silence from their end was incredibly loud and telling. Not hearing anything from them told me everything I needed to know about where I actually stood in their priorities. It wasn't a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a simple conversation. It wasn't a mistake that happened because of poor communication. It was them showing me exactly where I ranked in their family hierarchy. And now that I could see it clearly for what it was, I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to go back to playing that role anymore. About a week had passed since the Christmas incident, and there was still complete radio silence from my parents. No text messages, no phone calls, not even one of those awkward group chat messages that parents love to send with about 10 tree emojis saying something like, "Hope everyone had a great holiday." I figured that maybe they were feeling guilty about what had happened. Or perhaps they were just avoiding the whole uncomfortable situation until it somehow blew over on its own. I wasn't really in the mood to be the first person to reach out and try to fix things, so I just kept to myself and maintained my quiet distance. I wasn't actively stewing on the situation or obsessing over it at that point. I had kind of accepted it for what it was and moved on with my daily routine. Then one afternoon, there was an unexpected knock at my front door. I checked through the peephole and nearly rolled my eyes so hard they would have ended up in next week. It was my mom, standing there on my doorstep with no warning whatsoever. No, "Hey, can I stop by to talk?" Text message, nothing. She was just standing there like she hadn't completely excluded me from Christmas dinner and treated me like I was some weird neighbor kid who had shown up uninvited. I opened the door mostly out of curiosity about what she could possibly want and stepped aside to let her enter. She walked into my apartment with that same fake, calm demeanor she always used whenever she wanted something from me. You know the type of behavior I'm talking about. Super polite and friendly, but with a smile that's just a little too bright, overly casual in a way that feels forced and unnatural. She was trying to act completely normal but was clearly overselling the performance. She sat down on my couch like it was still her house, and she had every right to be there. Then gave me what had to be the most fake, "How are you, sweetheart?" I have ever heard in my entire life. I didn't even bother answering her fake pleasantries. I just sat down across from her in my living room and waited to see what she actually wanted. After some painfully forced small talk about completely meaningless topics like, "The weather's been strange lately, hasn't it?" she finally got to the real point of her visit. "So about the 750, she said, speaking as casually as if she was asking about a package that had gotten delayed in the mail. For context, I need to explain that I've been giving my parents $750 every single month for the past few years. This financial arrangement started when my dad had a serious health scare and ended up missing a couple of months of work as a result. They were really struggling to keep up with their bills during that difficult time, and I stepped in to help without even being asked to do so. I just started wiring the money to them regularly and told them not to worry about paying me back or stressing about their finances. I figured it was a temporary situation that would last just until they could get back on their feet financially. But somehow, just until we get back on our feet, gradually turned into me essentially paying their monthly rent. Then it expanded to helping with their car payments and eventually covering surprise emergency expenses that always seemed to show up at the most random and inconvenient times. They didn't explicitly ask me for money every single month, but it was always heavily implied that they needed and expected it. The situation had gotten to the point where if I happened to skip sending money for 1 month, my mom would send me passive-aggressive text messages about how incredibly tight things were financially for them. She'd make comments about how some of us don't have the luxury of a steady income, as if I hadn't been working 50-plus hours a week just to stay ahead of my own expenses and still have enough left over to support them. I stared at her sitting on my couch and asked, "What about it?" She tilted her head slightly like she genuinely didn't understand why I was asking for clarification. "You didn't send it this month," she stated, as matter-of-factly as if I had simply forgotten to take out the trash or pick up milk from the grocery store. She wasn't treating this like I had stopped sending almost $800 to two people who had literally shut their front door in my face just 1 week earlier. I sat there feeling surprisingly calm and collected as I responded, "Yeah, I know I didn't send it." She blinked at me like that wasn't a valid or acceptable response to her concern. "Well, why not?" she asked, sounding genuinely confused by my decision. I raised my eyebrows and said simply, "Because I don't have to anymore." That's when her fake friendly smile completely cracked and disappeared. Her face dropped for a split second before she tried to recover and put the pleasant mask back on. But the energy in the room had shifted dramatically, and there was no going back. "Marcus, this isn't something you can just stop doing," she said, her voice taking on a more serious and demanding tone. "We rely on that money for our basic expenses. Your father and I have bills that need to be paid. You know exactly how tight things have been for us financially." I leaned back in my chair and responded, "Yeah, I do know how tight things have been for you. I also know how tight it was for me last week when I stood on your front porch holding a homemade pie and you both pretended that I didn't exist." She didn't answer right away when I brought up the Christmas incident. She just kind of froze in place for several uncomfortable seconds. Then she let out this deep breath, like I was being completely overdramatic about the whole situation. "That wasn't personal, Marcus. We just had limited space available," she said, trying to dismiss my concerns. "You had folding chairs stacked up in the garage," I replied calmly. "I counted at least 3 of them through the window when I was walking back to my car." She didn't even attempt to deny that fact. She just looked annoyed that I had been observant enough to notice the extra seating that was readily available. Then she decided to switch tactics entirely. "Marcus, family members help each other out. You're in a position to give, and we're your parents. It's your responsibility to support us when we need it." That word, responsibility, really lit something inside me that I hadn't felt before. I've never had a problem helping my family when they genuinely needed assistance. But the way she said it, like I somehow owed them this money, like I was just supposed to keep handing over hundreds of dollars every month without question or complaint, that was completely different from voluntary family support. That wasn't love or mutual care. That was treating me like a transaction, like an ATM machine that they could access whenever they needed cash. And apparently, I was now late on my required monthly payment, so they had come to collect. I looked directly at her and said it again, but slower this time so there would be no misunderstanding. "I don't have to do it anymore, and I don't want to continue doing it." She stood up suddenly, clearly flustered and caught off guard by my firm response. "I can't believe this attitude, Marcus, after everything we've done for you over the years." I immediately cut her off before she could continue with that line of reasoning. "Everything you've done for me, Mom? Really? I moved out of your house when I was 20 years old. I've been paying all of my own bills since I graduated from college. You haven't financially supported me in years. Meanwhile, I've sent you thousands upon thousands of dollars to cover everything from your mortgage payments to Dad's car insurance premiums." She couldn't argue with those facts because she knew they were completely true. So then she tried a different approach: guilt manipulation. "Your father is going to be so upset when he finds out about this decision," she said, trying to make me feel bad about potentially disappointing him. I just shrugged my shoulders and responded, "That's not my fault or my problem to solve." She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore, like I had transformed into some completely different person right before her eyes. Then she said, "We're not done talking about this conversation," and stormed out of my apartment in a huff. Just when I thought that dramatic exit was the end of the confrontation, about 2 hours later I heard another knock at my door. This time, it wasn't just my mom standing there. It was her, my dad, and Katie. All 3 of them lined up on my doorstep like they were about to conduct some kind of formal job interview or intervention. My dad had his most serious expression on, with his arms crossed over his chest like he was ready to deliver a stern lecture. Katie was mindlessly scrolling through her phone like she was being forced to sit through the most boring community college orientation session of her life. Before I could even say anything or ask why they were all there, my dad stepped forward and took charge of the situation. "We need to understand why you're acting like this, Marcus. What's really going on with you?" he demanded. I actually laughed out loud at the absurdity of his question. "You literally shut the door in my face last week, and now you're confused about why I don't want to keep giving you money every month?" I asked incredulously. Katie didn't even bother looking up from her phone screen. She just mumbled dismissively, "This is so extra." That comment absolutely set me off more than anything else that had been said. "Extra?" I responded, my voice rising slightly. I've been paying for all of you to play house while I bust my ass working every single day, and I'm the one being extra? Katie finally looked up from her phone with that annoyed expression she always gets when someone interrupts her social media scrolling. My mom quickly jumped in, trying to calm the situation down before it escalated further. "Marcus, we love you. We just think you're making a rash decision based on hurt feelings," she said in that patronizing tone she uses when she thinks someone is being irrational. My dad added his own perspective. "You're part of this family, and family doesn't just walk away from each other when things get difficult." I looked directly at him and responded, "No, Dad. Family doesn't shut each other out. Treat them like they don't matter, and then come knocking when the money stops flowing." They all tried to talk over me at once, creating a chaotic mess of voices and excuses, but I'd had more than enough of this circus. I pointed directly toward my front door and said firmly, "You made it crystal clear last week that I wasn't part of your group. So go ask whoever got my seat at the Christmas dinner table to chip in $750. Nobody moved from their positions. They just stood there blinking at me like my words didn't compute or make sense. So I walked over to the door myself and opened it wide. "Leave," I said clearly. Now, they still didn't move initially. They just continued standing there in my living room, looking completely stunned by my directness. My mom was the first one to break the uncomfortable silence. "Marcus, don't be ridiculous," she said, forcing an awkward laugh like this was just some minor misunderstanding that could be smoothed over easily. "You can't seriously mean that," she continued, as if my clearly stated position was just some kind of temporary emotional outburst. "I do mean it," I replied without hesitation, stepping back just enough to keep my hand firmly on the door handle. "You can't do this to us," she said, her voice starting to rise with desperation. "Watch me," I responded calmly. Then I shut the door firmly and didn't look back to see their reactions. 2 days later, I was working from home and actually making some real progress on a project for the first time in weeks. Then I started hearing this weird, rhythmic thudding sound coming from outside my apartment. At first, I thought maybe it was the neighbor's kid bouncing a basketball against something, or perhaps some kind of construction work happening nearby. But the sound kept happening in irregular intervals, random soft thumps like something was hitting metal surfaces. I stood up from my desk, walked over to my window, and looked outside. I genuinely had to squint and focus my eyes because I couldn't believe what I was seeing down in my parking lot. It was my parents and my sister standing near my car and throwing eggs at it. Real eggs from full cartons, splatting against the hood, the windshield, and the driver's side door. Katie was even launching them underhand like she was playing some kind of carnival game, and she was actually laughing while doing it. My dad wasn't saying anything at all. He was just silently hurling eggs like he was back in Little League trying to strike out the opposing team's best batter. And my mom, she was yelling loud enough for the entire parking lot to hear. She was shouting things like, "Maybe now you'll remember who your family is," and "This is what happens when you turn your back on the people who raised you." I stood at my window completely stunned by what I was witnessing. These were supposed to be mature adults in their 50s, plus a grown woman in her 20s, acting like rebellious teenagers in some bad high school movie. I didn't even rush outside to confront them or start yelling back. Instead, I calmly pulled out my phone and hit the record button. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just steady video footage of 3 people I happened to be biologically related to committing what had to be the most childish act of vandalism I'd ever seen in my life. After about 5 minutes of this absolutely ridiculous spectacle, one of my neighbors, bless his heart, stepped outside from his own apartment. He shouted across the parking lot, "Hey, I'm calling the police if you people don't leave right now." That definitely got their attention in a hurry. My mom actually had the audacity to yell something back at him about minding his own business, but they quickly realized they needed to get out of there. They scrambled to get into their car and drove off, like they hadn't just spent the last several minutes egging their own son's vehicle in broad daylight for everyone in the complex to see. Once they were completely gone and the parking lot was quiet again, I walked outside to assess the damage they had caused. My car looked like it had been caught in some kind of bizarre bakery brawl. There was egg dripping down the sides, bits of broken shell stuck to the windshield wipers, and the smell was already starting to turn unpleasant. It wasn't just annoying to deal with. It was genuinely gross and disgusting. The kind of mess that completely ruins your mood even before you have to spend time and money cleaning it up yourself. But I didn't clean it off immediately like most people probably would have. I had other plans for how to handle this situation. I went back inside my apartment, downloaded the video footage from my phone, and made several copies of it on different devices. Then I called the non-emergency police line to report what had happened. I explained the entire situation calmly and professionally, providing them with my detailed statement and emailing them the video evidence I had captured. The officer I spoke with on the phone was very professional about the whole thing, but I could definitely tell from his tone of voice that he also thought the situation was completely ridiculous. "You said this was your parents who did this?" he asked, sounding like he needed confirmation that he had heard me correctly. "Yep, I sure did," I replied matter-of-factly. I also called my car insurance company just in case the paint had gotten damaged from the eggs sitting on it for too long in the sun. Then I called a professional auto detailing shop and scheduled a complete cleaning service for the next morning. It was going to cost me a decent chunk of money, but it was absolutely worth it for reasons that will become clear later. I made sure to keep the receipt for everything. That night, the text messages started flooding in. First one came from my mom. "What is wrong with you? We were just expressing our frustration, not trying to hurt you. You're really going to go cry to the police over this?" Then Katie followed up with what I can only describe as a classic response from her. "You're such a drama queen. Nobody even scratched your stupid car." I didn't respond to either of their messages. Instead, I simply forwarded both text conversations to the same police officer who had taken my initial report. The next day, while my car was getting professionally detailed and restored to its original condition, I received a phone call from a private number that I didn't recognize. I answered it anyway, and surprise, it was my dad on the other end. He didn't waste any time on small talk or pleasantries. He went straight to the point. "You need to drop this nonsense right now, Marcus. You're taking things way too far with this police report." I responded calmly, "You threw eggs at my car in a public parking lot." His reply was immediate. "And you stopped paying us like we're complete strangers. That was disrespectful and hurtful." I actually laughed out loud at his reasoning. "You literally told me I wasn't welcome in your house, Dad. So which is it? Am I family or not?" He started getting louder and more aggressive, accusing me of being spiteful, cold-hearted, and turning my back on the people who raised me and sacrificed for me. I told him directly, "Raising your child doesn't come with a lifetime subscription to their bank account, and maybe you should have thought twice before treating me like a burden with a checkbook attached." Then came his final attempt at manipulation. "This whole situation is going to split the entire family apart, Marcus." I responded without hesitation. "You already did that the second you pretended I didn't exist." Then I hung up the phone and didn't look back. I didn't hear anything from any of them for the rest of that day. But I knew deep down that this wasn't over yet. People like my parents and Katie don't just back down and admit they were wrong. They regroup, reassess their strategy, and then come back even louder and more demanding than before. Sure enough, the very next morning I found an email in my inbox from their lawyer. Apparently, they had received official notice of the complaint I had filed with the police department, and their attorney wanted to resolve this matter informally, which basically translated to, "Please don't press charges because our pride can't handle the embarrassment." So I wrote back to their lawyer with a response that was calm, short, and completely factual. I attached the bill for the professional car detailing service, added an invoice for the potentially ruined paint that the shop had mentioned might need touch-up work in the future, and included another copy of the video footage just for good measure. I told them in clear terms that I wasn't dropping anything or backing down until I was reimbursed in full for all the damage they had caused. That was the last communication I heard from anyone for about a week. Then, like magic, a check showed up in my mailbox one day. There was no note attached, no apology letter, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a payment for the exact amount I had requested and a signature on the bottom. I cashed that check immediately and couldn't help but smile while doing it, because at that point it wasn't really about getting my money back anymore. It was about making sure they understood loud and clear that I wasn't the same guy they could treat like garbage and still expect to fund their comfortable lifestyle. They had drawn their line in the sand at Christmas dinner when they shut me out. I drew my line right after those eggs hit my windshield, and they realized there would be real consequences for their actions. I figured that having to pay for the damage they caused might serve as the weird wake-up call they clearly needed. Like maybe they'd finally understand, hey, you can't treat your adult child like trash, vandalize his property, and then act surprised when there are actual consequences for your behavior. But I forgot exactly who I was dealing with here. People like my parents and Katie don't really learn meaningful lessons from experiences like this. They just rewrite the entire story in their heads to make themselves the victims, and then keep going like nothing ever happened. The following week, I started noticing something completely new happening. I wasn't just being ignored or given the silent treatment anymore. Now I had somehow transformed into the villain of the entire family narrative. It started with a group text message that I had been part of forever. You know the type of extended family chat that everyone gets added to. It's usually used for sharing birthday reminders, coordinating holiday planning, and the occasional, look at this funny meme I found moments that someone's aunt thinks is hilarious. I hadn't said a single word in that group chat since before the Christmas disaster, but suddenly it lit up like a Christmas tree with messages from Katie. She started sending these vague, passive-aggressive posts like, "It's just really sad when family stops acting like family," and "Money really does change people and not for the better." She didn't tag me directly or mention my name specifically, but come on. It was completely obvious to everyone in the chat who she was talking about. A few of our aunts chimed in with those half-sympathetic, half-passive-aggressive responses that older relatives are famous for. Comments like, "I hope everyone finds peace soon," and "Family relationships are complicated, but we all have to keep trying to work things out." I didn't respond to any of it, and I didn't even bother opening the group thread after I saw where the conversation was heading. Then I started getting individual text messages from various cousins, some of whom I hadn't talked to in months or even longer. A few of these cousin messages were from people who were genuinely confused and just wanted to understand what had actually happened. To those family members, I gave them the short, honest version of events. I got uninvited from Christmas dinner, stopped sending my monthly financial support, and then got my car egged in retaliation. That brief explanation usually shut down any further questioning pretty quickly. Other cousins came in swinging with their own opinions and judgments, clearly having heard only one side of the story. Like my cousin Blake, who texted me, "Dude, you really sued your parents over some eggs? Chill out, man." To which I replied, "Tell them to chill out next time they're at the grocery store loading up on ammunition." But my personal favorite response came from Katie herself. She texted me a single message that consisted of nothing but a crying emoji. Not even actual words, just the emoji. Like that was supposed to convey some deep meaning or make me feel guilty. Like I was supposed to read that and immediately think, "Oh no, she's sad. Time to Venmo the rent money again." I didn't respond to her emotional manipulation attempt. At this point, my silence was doing all the communicating I needed to do, and that silence was clearly driving them absolutely insane. You could tell they were all waiting for me to lose my temper or have some kind of emotional outburst, so they could point at me and say, "See, he's the real problem here." But I wasn't going to play that game anymore. I was completely done with their drama and manipulation tactics. The text messages kept coming from various family members. My mom tried calling me several times over the next few days, leaving voicemails that would start out sounding nice and concerned, but would end up getting snippy and accusatory. One particular voicemail went something like this. "Hi, sweetheart. Just wondering if you'd reconsider your position on everything that's happened." And then ended with, "I hope you realize what this whole situation is doing to your father's health and well-being." Katie's approach was her usual combination of sarcasm masked as deep, philosophical thoughts. She sent me a text saying, "We all make mistakes in life, but it takes a bigger person to forgive and move forward. I guess you're not there yet in your personal growth, right? Because apparently I'm the one who needs to work on forgiveness." After getting pelted with eggs like I was some kind of target in a carnival game run by vindictive teenagers. Then came what I can only describe as the classic guilt manipulation maneuver that my family loves to use. My dad actually emailed me instead of calling, which was unusual for him. He sent this long, rambling message about how all the stress from this entire situation had been affecting him physically. He claimed that his sleep patterns were completely disrupted, his appetite was gone, and that my actions were creating a permanent rift in the family that might never heal properly. He also made sure to include this line, word for word. "At some point, Marcus, you'll regret pushing your family away like this." Cool. So the man who literally stood behind my mom while she told me I wasn't invited to dinner is now deeply concerned about family rifts and relationship damage. Still, I maintained my silence. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of thinking I was still emotionally invested in their drama or that they could still push my buttons. I was completely out of their toxic cycle. I was doing my laundry in complete peace, working without constant interruptions, cooking actual meals instead of stress-eating junk food at midnight because I was worried about their latest crisis. I was going for regular walks again and enjoying simple pleasures, little things that might sound boring to other people but felt incredibly refreshing to me. It was like I finally had mental breathing room for the first time in years. And the longer I stayed quiet and refused to engage, the louder and more desperate they became in their attempts to get my attention. They started involving other people who had no business being part of our family drama. My aunt on my dad's side randomly sent me a voice message out of nowhere about how family is forever, and that money isn't worth cutting ties over. Another cousin direct messaged me on Instagram to say, "Don't let pride ruin everything you have with your family." The thing is, I hadn't posted anything on social media about what had happened. I hadn't shared my side of the story publicly, or tried to turn other family members against my parents. So it was crystal clear that the family gossip machine was running at full speed, and everyone was only getting my parents' carefully edited version of events. They were probably hearing some completely fabricated story where I had transformed into this greedy, ungrateful son who stopped providing financial support out of nowhere for no good reason. No one seemed interested in talking about the part where my own parents kicked me off the guest list for Christmas dinner. No one bothered to ask if I was okay or how I was handling the situation emotionally. It was entirely focused on them, their stress, their disappointment, their damaged reputation, their financial struggles. I had somehow become the villain in the group chat narrative. I was now the ungrateful son who had gone rogue and abandoned his family responsibilities. I started muting people's phone numbers instead of blocking them completely, just muting their notifications so I wouldn't be constantly bothered by their messages. It felt better than engaging with their manipulation tactics or trying to defend myself to people who weren't there and didn't bother asking for the full story. I wasn't going to waste my time and energy explaining myself to family members who weren't present during any of these incidents and couldn't be bothered to get both sides before making their judgments. And honestly, even if they had asked for my perspective, I probably wouldn't have wasted my breath trying to convince them. Here's the thing that I want to make absolutely clear. I'm not ashamed of what I did. Not even a little bit. I stopped financially supporting people who treated me like a walking bank account with legs, and then acted shocked and offended when the ATM started charging interest for their withdrawals. And honestly, the whole experience was incredibly freeing in ways I hadn't expected. Every time I saw a new accusatory message pop up on my phone that I didn't feel obligated to answer, that felt like a small victory. Every missed call I ignored without feeling guilty about it was another win for my peace of mind. I didn't owe them my emotional energy anymore, and I definitely didn't owe them access to my thoughts and feelings. Not after everything they had put me through. They thought that egging my car would be the end of this whole situation. They assumed I'd come crawling back once the initial shock wore off, and I came to my senses. What they didn't realize is that I wasn't operating from a place of anger anymore. I had moved past anger and reached the stage where I was simply done with all of them. And there's a huge difference between those two emotional states. Angry people eventually come back to continue arguing and fighting. Done people walk away permanently and don't look back. It's been about 5 months since everything went down with my family, and my life has honestly been incredibly peaceful. Like ridiculously, surprisingly peaceful in the best possible way. I didn't realize how loud and chaotic everything used to be until all of it finally stopped completely. The constant weight of being the default problem solver and financial fixer for the entire family is just gone. Completely gone. It's been nice living in this uneventful calm, and I've been enjoying the quiet in the best possible way. So you can imagine my surprise when I heard a very deliberate knock at my front door last week. It wasn't a quick, casual knock like the Amazon delivery guy makes, or the kind of brief tap a neighbor might make when they have a simple question. This was the kind of slow, persistent knocking that lets you know someone is standing out there waiting for a response and they're not planning to go anywhere until that door opens and they get what they came for. I got up from my comfortable spot on the couch, expecting I honestly don't even know what. Maybe a neighbor with a package mix-up or perhaps someone from the apartment management with a maintenance issue. I certainly wasn't expecting what I actually found when I opened that door. There they were. My mom, my dad, and Katie, standing on my front porch with actual suitcases. Real, full-sized rolling luggage like they were about to check into a hotel or catch a flight somewhere. My mom was clutching this beat-up old tote bag in her hands, and she had that strange, forced smile she always gets when she's trying to act like she's not completely desperate. My dad looked absolutely exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes, hadn't shaved in what looked like several days, and generally appeared like he hadn't been sleeping well. Katie was wearing an oversized hoodie with her hair thrown up in a messy bun, casually chewing gum like we had just interrupted her relaxing spa day instead of her showing up at my door dragging luggage behind her. "Marcus," my mom started, and I immediately knew this was about to be something major. "We've had a really rough few weeks," she said, her voice dropping into that overly dramatic tone she used to use whenever the cable bill was running late and she needed to explain why we couldn't afford to pay it on time. "There have been some serious issues with the house and rent situation. Your father's work hours got cut significantly, and Katie's job situation is still, well, you know how that is. Anyway, we need a place to stay, just for a little while until we can figure things out. She said all of this like it was the most natural, reasonable thing in the world. Like after 5 months of complete radio silence, after vandalizing my car in broad daylight, after treating me like I was a stranger at Christmas dinner, now they expected me to offer them a warm welcome and a spare room in my apartment. I looked at them standing there with their actual packed luggage, and the only thing I could think about was that cold December day when I stood on their front porch holding a homemade pie. The day when I was told, "We don't have more seats, maybe next year." Except this time the roles were completely reversed. I was the one on the inside looking out, and they were the ones left standing in the cold, asking for permission to enter. My dad stepped forward and tried to take control of the conversation. "We just need a few weeks, Marcus. Just until we can figure out our next steps and get back on our feet. We can sleep on the couch if we have to. We're not picky about the arrangements." Katie finally looked up from her phone and mumbled, "Yeah, like 2 weeks maximum." 2 weeks from the girl who hasn't successfully held a job for longer than a pop-up sale event at the mall. The same person who thinks working means posting artistic photos on Instagram and calling herself a freelance creative professional. My hands instinctively moved to rest on the doorframe. I didn't raise my voice, didn't launch into some dramatic speech about everything they had done wrong. I just looked at them calmly and said, "Yeah, no, you're not staying here." My mom blinked at me like she was genuinely confused by my response. "What do you mean?" she asked, as if my answer hadn't been perfectly clear. "You're not staying here," I repeated. "Not happening." My dad furrowed his brow and tried the family card again. "Come on, Marcus. We're family. You can't just turn us away when we need help." There was that magic word again. Family. The word that only gets used when it benefits them, never when it means actually showing up for someone else or treating them with basic respect and consideration. I leaned slightly into the doorway, maintaining my position as the barrier between them and my apartment. That's funny because when I showed up 5 months ago with a homemade pie, I was told there weren't enough chairs available. Remember that conversation? They didn't answer my question. They just stood there in uncomfortable silence, probably hoping I would forget about that incident or let it slide. Katie let out an exaggerated sigh and muttered under her breath, "Are you really still mad about that stupid dinner?" I actually laughed out loud. Not a fake laugh or a sarcastic one, but an honest laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest. It was the kind of genuine laughter that happens when something is so ridiculous that you can't help but find it amusing. "No, Katie, I'm not mad about Christmas dinner anymore. I'm just completely done with all of you." My mom's expression shifted, and she looked like she was about to start crying. "Marcus, please. We literally have nowhere else to go right now. We're desperate." I shrugged my shoulders matter-of-factly. "That sounds like something you need to figure out, but you're not going to figure it out here in my apartment." My dad tried one more time with a slightly different approach. "Just for a few nights, Marcus. We're not asking for much." "I don't have room," I stated simply. "We'll sleep on the floor if we have to," he replied, clearly getting more desperate. I nodded calmly and said, "Yeah, well, I spent years sleeping on the metaphorical floor while you treated me like an outsider who didn't belong. Now I've upgraded to sleeping in peace." They stood there for what felt like an eternity. Just stood there without any backup plan, without any alternative ideas, just blind hope that I would eventually fold like I always used to. They genuinely believed that showing up at my door with a couple of suitcases would somehow erase everything that had happened between us. The level of entitlement didn't even feel intentional anymore. It seemed like it was just completely ingrained in who they were as people. They truly couldn't imagine a version of reality where I would actually say no to them and mean it. I gave them one last long look. There was no anger in my expression, no pity, just complete clarity about the situation. Then I said, "I hope you figure things out," and I shut the door quietly. I didn't slam it dramatically, didn't lock it with emphasis. I just closed it quietly and calmly, the same way they had closed theirs on me. I watched through the peephole for a few seconds out of curiosity. They stood there for about a minute, not moving, probably waiting for the door to magically open again. When it became clear that wasn't going to happen, they finally turned around and walked back toward the curb, dragging their bags behind them like disappointed tourists. Katie was already back to scrolling on her phone before they even reached the street. I went back to my couch, picked up my book, and continued reading exactly where I'd left off. The apartment was quiet again, peaceful and calm. Later that night, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was probably Katie using a different phone. All it said was, "You'll regret this decision." I didn't reply to the message. I just deleted it without giving it a second thought. Then I set my phone down on the coffee table, looked around my little apartment, and let out a long, satisfied exhale. For the first time in years, the door that had always swung only one direction, always open for them when they needed something, always closed to me when I needed them, had finally closed permanently. And I was the one who had closed it.